Award ceremony for the 2023 Barlett and Steele Awards for Investigative Business Journalism. And in terms of awards for business journalism, this is the World Series. So you come to the right place tonight. So thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Jeff Timmermans. I'm the director of the Reynolds Center for Business Journalism here at Cronkite. The Reynolds Center established the Barlett and Steele Awards in 2007 to recognize the importance of investigative business journalism reporting and to promote in-depth, accurate journalism in the public interest, which is the mission of the center. Last year, we expanded the awards to recognize the great investigative work being done by local and regional publications, in addition to global and national publications. We also launched an award for Outstanding Young Journalist, and this is the second year we've given that award. These awards are named for the only reporting team to receive 2 Pulitzer Prizes for newspaper reporting and 2 National Magazine Awards for magazine work, Don Barlett and Jim Steele. Jim Steele is with us in the audience tonight, and it's a wonderful opportunity to announce a new initiative by the Reynolds Center that Jim has graciously agreed to allow us to use his name for, the James B. Steele Fellowship in Investigative Business Journalism. So from next academic year, we will be offering a full scholarship with a stipend and a funded internship for applicants to one of our major master's programs here at Cronkite. So stay tuned for more information on that. It's an exciting initiative and fits in with Reynolds Center's mission to further promote business journalism throughout the United States and throughout the world. Before we get to the winners, I would like to introduce Jim Steele, who's in the audience. Jim, would you like to stand for recognition? Thank you. Do you want to come? Well, we're going to hear more from Jim. He's going to facilitate the discussion with the Gold Award winners, so we'll have a chance to talk with him a bit later. Thank you, Jim. So before we do get on with the discussion with our Gold winners, I'd like to announce the winners of this year's awards, some of whom could not be with us tonight, but I did want to recognize each one by name. Starting with the global national category, the Bronze Award this year goes to the Wall Street Journal for their series Capital Assets. The journal revealed that more than 2,600 top federal officials traded stocks in companies they help oversee, often in violation of the law. Their comprehensive reporting made this information digestible and accessible to the public, which is an essential component in governmental transparency. Following this investigation, 2 U.S. senators introduced bipartisan legislation to bar members of the federal executive branch and lawmakers from owning stock in individual companies. So congratulations to the Wall Street Journal. The Silver Award in the Global National category goes to a joint investigation by ProPublica and the Capital Forum titled Uncovered. This collaboration presented deep dives into common, underreported, bad faith practices within the health insurance industry that gravely impacted the lives of the insured. In their meticulous research, the team of reporters identified 3 key ways health insurance actors can put patients at massive physical and financial risk, sometimes out of reach of any existing laws. We're delighted to have with us tonight Patrick Rucker of the Capital Forum to come up and accept the award. Patrick. The gold winner in the global national category this year goes to the Los Angeles Times for their series Legal Weed, Broken Promises. This investigation highlights how the legalization in California of marijuana was expected to address the illegal cannabis market and address numerous violence and environmental degradation. Instead, illegal markets have surged since the legalization in 2016. The investigation exposed human rights abuses of cannabis workers who are mostly immigrants and documented over a dozen deaths of cannabis growers and workers poisoned by carbon monoxide, as well as bribery and corruption that showed the state government's negligence in clamping down on marijuana companies and individuals operating illegal cannabis farms. As noted by the judges, the investigation is, quote, a richly reported account of the devastating impact of the legalization of cannabis on the state of California, local and state governments, which were totally unprepared, and even legal growers were overwhelmed by a surge in cannabis cultivation, bribery, and violence on a scale the state had never before witnessed. We're delighted to have with us tonight Paige St. Ruben Vives, Robert Lopez, and Marisa Gerber of the Los Angeles Times to accept the award. Turning now to the regional and local category, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution wins the the Bronze Award, for American Dream for Rent. As noted by the judges, this series powerfully demonstrated how some of Wall Street's biggest private equity firms are driving a generational housing shortage in Atlanta by gobbling up hundreds of homes and then renting them out at high prices with poor or even non-existent maintenance. It's a call to action in a state that has been historically resistant to housing reform. So congratulations to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for American Dream for Rent. The Silver Award in the regional local category goes to the Oregonian for data centers. This investigation revealed how companies like Google and Amazon received considerable tax breaks from local cities and gobbled up precious water resources that hurt local communities. The stories raised awareness about the costs that go hand in hand with the benefits of attracting major tech companies in communities that are desperate for jobs and growth, including the startling revelation of just how much water is drained to keep these businesses running. So congratulations to the Oregonian for data centers. The Gold Award this year goes to a multimedia investigation by Public Health Watch, KPCC, LAist, and Univision called Silicosis Cluster in Southern California. Following a tip about exponentially rising cases of silicosis, a rare, deadly lung disease, among Latino workers working in often backyard workshops, cutting artificial countertops, the team of reporters discovered that demand for this new product, coupled with poor workplace protections, created a fatal trend. The initial publication not only uncovered the problem, the cause, and the massive fallout, but spurred legislative action on the state and federal levels. California passed an emergency rule, regulated fabrication shops using silica, and Los Angeles County began efforts to ban artificial stone products nationwide. We're delighted to have with us tonight Jim Morris of Public Health Watch to accept the award. Jim. And finally, we'd like to honor this year's outstanding young journalist, Ava Kofman of ProPublica. This is the second time ProPublica has won this award, and we're delighted to have Ava Kofman here tonight. Ava wins with her investigation, The Hospice Hustle, that was published with ProPublica and The New Yorker. Her reporting found that in an industry that began as a visionary notion to allow terminally ill patients to die with dignity in their own homes, has since turned into a for-profit hustle, plagued by exploitation and hardship. In immediate response to the publication of this piece, what was hailed by experts as an unusual and impressive, leaders from the industry banded together to push for an unprecedented level of oversight, including an immediate investigation into specific hospices identified in the piece, and immediate policy reforms. Ava, congratulations. Nope, this one. There we go. There we go. Make sure we got the right one there. Congratulations.
All right. 3, 2, 1.
And now I'd like to turn it over to Jim Steele, who will facilitate the discussion with the Gold Award winners tonight. Turn it over to Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be here for these awards because it's a reminder of the role that the press can play and how important business reporting is in our society. All of us every day are affected one way or another by business. And what we've seen tonight is examples of the way we can approach that subject and the kind of light that we can shine on various aspects of that economy. I want to thank the Reynolds Center again for the sophistication of this award, the whole judging process, which I have nothing to do with. I just come out here for this wonderful event where I get to congratulate people and ask them how they did these stories. And that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to talk to people, and at the end of this, we want to encourage everybody to ask any and all questions about these articles, about anything about reporting and editing. Our purpose tonight is to be educational and informative, so anything you want to talk about, we're up here to deal with. First of all, I'd like to talk to you, Paige, and your LA Times group. Tell us a little bit about how your great story came about. What got you onto it?
This was a kind of a dreaded assignment. It was the 5-year anniversary of legalization, and the idea was just to check in and see how it had worked. And so we scattered. We looked at the promises for legalization, the social equity, the end of the war on drugs, what was it doing, within communities and tax revenue, and what had happened to the illegal market. And then immediately, I think we all returned, from our different directions with horror stories. And I think that's the point at which we pivoted, realized that this was a very different, reporting process we would be going through, and it required long-term investigative digging in. So we spent, more than a year, I think, 5 years if you were to add up the work of each one of the reporters going in these different directions to drill in. And then it would get worse from there because, for instance, I'm looking at outlaw grows, and then I begin hearing rumors about deaths. And now, by the way, up to more than 50 deaths in just 10 counties in a 5-year period. It's just been astonishing. And it's not on anybody's radar until we brought the stories forward about corruption, the failure to provide social equity, just runaway, rampant illegal market, and incredible violence in communities that had been overtaken, like one community, Covelo in Northern California. You've got grows behind churches, next to the school, next to the Ace Hardware. They're everywhere, and just it's taken over this community. We did not expect what we found. So.
Tell me again, what was your process in terms of once you were onto this general topic, what are the first things that you began to do? The reason I asked this question, the most primary question I think we all face as reporters is how to begin a project once we get the rough idea of
how do you start?
Where do we go? What are the things and we're all different on this, by the way, and that's the thing we should emphasize.
Right.
That's the wonderful thing about reporting. There's no one way to do it. But there are certain maybe established paths we take at some point in this process.
Yeah, I have a rule that has always been my guide, and that is to get to the raw material. I call it eat raw, but to get to the primary source. But the problem with cannabis, and this was like my problem for more than 6 months or so, is I couldn't find any raw material. Like everything was rhetoric, and there was no truth. And nobody told the same story. And it was for a long time, I was very frustrated because everything was a lie. And I guess that's when you know it's a really good story, when everything's a lie. You suddenly begin to realize this is not what's happening. And then you have to start trusting your senses as a reporter. And in my case, I spent a tremendous amount of time in the field, on grows, hanging out with cops, as they busted grows, then going into communities myself and getting to know the workers and getting them to take me onto grows and just infiltrating until we got to ground truth. And then the story began to unfold. And then I brought satellite imagery, I brought my other data analysis tools, but that reporting in the field was really the icebreaker for this. And then following my questions, following my hunches, and you get this radar about this doesn't make sense, and so you press a little harder. You follow a rumor, the rumor of people dying, for instance, became the primary focus eventually. Yeah.
Before we go any further, we should tell you that anybody who's a journalism student, I really urge you to read these articles because, and they're all, you can find on the businessjournalism.org website, the links. A lot, in addition to teaching and maybe a good professor here and there and so forth, one of the most important tools you can do as a journalist is to read other journalism. Read the good stuff, read the great things, read the bad things for what it's worth, but see how people do it. See the carpentry that they've engaged in, that has erected these particular stories. And we're also in an age where it's very easy to do that because all the major contests in the world, around the world, the U.S., the Pulitzers, SPJ, IRE, Investigative Reporters and Editors, this award contest, all of those things are online. So I really urge you to read them and see how the work was done. It's not a matter of copying that, it's just seeing what those techniques were and how they succeeded. So, Jim, can you tell us, Jim Morris, responsible for this amazing story on silicosis, and tell us on the poisoning of many workers in particularly the Los Angeles area, though it goes on everywhere, I'm sure. Tell us a little bit about how you got onto that and what some of the consequences were.
Sure. In the summer of, it would have been 2022, I heard from a longtime source of mine who is himself a physician in California, in the Bay Area. And he said, hey, I've gotten to know this doctor in LA, and she's seeing a lot of young Latino workers who are dying of silicosis. That's a disease I knew very well. I had worked on a big project in Houston 30 years earlier. It's sort of like black lung, if you've heard of that, among coal miners. It's a fine dust that gets in your lungs, causes fibrosis. You basically suffocate slowly to death. It's incurable. If you're lucky, you might be able to get a double lung transplant and survive a few more years, but it's a death sentence once you've got it. And so he gave me the doctor's name. I didn't know her. I called her. She's at UCLA, one of the UCLA medical centers. And she wanted to talk, but she had to run it through the hierarchy, and talk to the bosses at UCLA. And after a while, she said, okay, I'll talk to you. And so I went out there to LA about a year ago, the fall of 22. And she opened the door. She introduced me and my reporting partners with Southern California Public Radio and Univision, introduced us to a couple of her sickest patients, 2 young men, one of whom has since died. It just opened the door, and I was very lucky that she was able to cooperate. Turns out it's the biggest cluster of this disease, as far as we know, in the country. And I think the number of cases in California as a whole is up to 77. That's almost certainly an undercount. When we went out there a year ago, I think they'd found at least 30 just in the LA area. And again, bear in mind, this is a death sentence. This is not some illness that you can be cured of. It's just when you've got it, you've got it. So that's how it started.
And you should all talk to us about this, but what was the greatest obstacle that you encountered as you got into this? Was it the science or the health aspects of this? I mean, who had it versus some other diseases? What was your your most difficult problem as you went through with this?
You know, we didn't have, compared to some other stories I've worked on, we didn't have any huge barriers because the workers wanted to talk. My radio reporting colleague who was with me on all the interviews speaks fluent Spanish. She did all the interviews with the workers. We didn't have to really convince them to talk. I already knew a lawyer in Long Beach who was representing a lot of these guys. I knew him from previous toxic tort type cases. He cooperated with us. The companies, the manufacturers of these products wouldn't talk to us. I didn't think they would. We asked all the big ones for statements, nothing. But, you know, I didn't expect anything. So it was real. I won't say it was a simple story, but for an investigative piece, it was relatively simple and straightforward. It took us about 4 months to pull it all together.
One of the points Jim makes is worth emphasizing. That is, anytime you do a controversial story where, you know, people are dying and some companies are obviously responsible for this one way or another, it's always important in every case to let that person, to inform that person that you're writing the story and to give them an opportunity to respond to it. In this case, obviously, they chose to ignore this and hope that you went away. But obviously, that story's had some legs that maybe they wish they had said something in return. But we're going to talk now with Ava, who wrote an amazing story on the hospice industry that has been radically changed in the United States over the last few years. And in fact, it's a fairly new industry to begin with. But tell us how this whole issue developed. What got you onto this? What was the clue?
Yeah, in my case, it was an editor's idea. It just kind of started out as a word, as a subject, not really as a story, but was poking around a few different things. And my editor said, you know, what about hospice? And, you know, some of the kind of basic facts were quite well known, you know, that hospice had, you know, originally been, you know, a mostly kind of non-profit, mission-driven service that over the past 2 decades had been completely transformed into an industry. In 2000, you know, 70% of hospices were nonprofit. When I started looking into this a year ago, 70% were for-profit. So everything had kind of switched. And in recent years, there had been some studies showing that, you know, private equity ownership of hospice had tripled, which when you hear the words private equity, you know, that can always be interesting or a lead for a story. But I wasn't really sure if there was new work to be done or if there was anything to look into until I started kind of calling people in the industry and speaking in particular to people who'd worked as directors of hospice branches as part of large chains, as marketers, as nurses, and understanding their perspective as people whose job it was to bring people into hospice who weren't actually about to die, who weren't actually dying, and having these conversations with whistleblowers at these companies who had found out about these kind of cases of fraud, of, you know, bringing in ineligible patients, speaking with such candor, saying, you know, I have patients who are out tap dancing and shooting deer and taking Polish lessons. You know, they're nowhere near death. And hearing those details and understanding that there was a way into this story that wasn't just from the patient's and family's perspective, which had been told and is, you know, often the perspective we take in healthcare reporting and healthcare stories, but over the shoulder of a kind of marketer, you know, driving around a poor neighborhood and, you know, trying to kind of sign people up for a service that they didn't really need. That was something I hadn't quite read before or seen before. And when I started hearing about that, I started seeing a kind of different way in. And from there, a lot of other things unfolded.
What did you find the biggest obstacle that you had to face?
So one really big obstacle with hospice is that the people you're writing about, for the most part, are all going to be dead. And, you know, measuring whether, you know, a death went well or badly is a lot more challenging than, you know, a typical med-mal case where you might be saying, you know, there's a certain standard for how this surgery is supposed to go and, you know, it didn't meet the standard of care. Lawsuits against hospice companies by individual patients and families are incredibly rare because the patient, is supposed to die, right? I mean, so saying, their care wasn't quite right is actually quite difficult to litigate. And so kind of finding the right stories to document that harm, finding the right medical records that would give us enough substantiation. No one's usually happy when a family member dies. So distinguishing, the kind of run-of-the-mill complaints, for lack of a better word, from, documented cases of abuse and harm and medical neglect was really crucial. And so I would say that, among other things, was a key obstacle. There's no political constituency when it comes to the dying that we have around kind of other areas. So I didn't kind of have a built-in network of sources. There's no advocacy groups really that work on hospice in the same way that we have, long-term care, groups and Medicare groups that you can kind of call on all sorts of other healthcare issues.
I'd like to ask all three of you a question. It's the same question. You ready? Okay. I realize your job, you're a journalist, you're a reporter. You're presenting these facts, and other people have to react on this, government officials or whatever. Looking at this, not as a journalist, but just as a person, what in each of your, by the way, let me go back a second. The wonderful theme that runs through all three of these stories, and I really encourage people to read these, they're marvelous stories. The theme that runs through them really are human beings. They're different kinds of human beings. In the case of the Los Angeles Times series on weed, it's the workers who are victimized. It's the townspeople and county people who are living in the midst of this violence around them that the law enforcement authorities cannot control. In the case of silicosis, it's obviously the workers who are so desperate for work and a job, they'll take these things and without any preparation or any safety precautions they take to protect their lives eventually. And obviously in terms of hospice, you have the victims themselves, as well, I suspect, some of the people working in the industry who are very poorly paid. If you could design something in each of your cases, what's one thing that would make this situation better? Would it be tougher enforcement by the state of California? Would it be a federal law on occupational safety and health? Would it be something new in the whole healthcare system? Would it be something to put some restraints on the private equity market that has caused a lot of these more recent? Take it away, Paige.
Yeah, mine is easy in that it's public awareness, because the regulator, you can't regulate this away, right? The profit margins are so huge in cannabis that, and that was the lie, right? The big lie sold to voters that there would be no corruption, and then that's what Robert and Ruben and Adam found was just massive corruption, or that they wouldn't be exploiting and killing workers because they're making so much money. And the power in that equation, the counter power, is the consumer. And so bringing visibility to what's going on educates consumers, and consumers can drive that market. I mean, if I say blood diamonds, you know what I'm talking about. So for me, it's like, why don't people think about that with weed? And maybe they won't until they realize that their own health is on the line, that it becomes like tobacco, and that they realize that there's a health risk to themselves. But that's the thing, is to get people to care and educate and their eyes open. Make these victims visible and let consumers know that they're part of that pipeline, that equation, that problem. They're driving this market.
My answer is actually pretty similar. Regulation's important, and the state of California has stepped up enforcement. But there are at least 800 of these fabrication shops in California, many of which are very small and tucked into industrial parks. You'd never even notice them if you were driving by. So they're hard to find. They move around. In other words, so regulation only goes so far. So just as Paige said, it really will be up to the consumer. And that's why, because these artificial countertops are so popular and have been for 10, 15, 20 years. Many of us probably have them in our homes and may not even know it. Until that demand drops, this hazard will continue. And that's why the lawyer we interviewed in Long Beach, who's representing many of these guys, is suing the manufacturers. There wouldn't be any point in suing the employers of these workers. They're gone anyway. But his theory, and we'll see how it works, is you've got to hit the manufacturers, the big guys that make these slabs that these small shops buy and cut and fabricate.
I don't even know where to begin. I mean, I think there have been some changes, both regulatory and in terms of increased oversight, but whenever you kind of have an opportunity to make money by, cutting services or overcharging for services that you're not providing, which, is not unique to hospice, is true of many sectors of healthcare, you're going to have people kind of taking advantage of both sides of that game. So I guess, asking serious questions about, whether financializing dying is, a good thing, perhaps are, a little belated given that dying has been financialized and these companies aren't going away. But one of the things I continue to find crazy is that, any of us in this room could basically open up a hospice if we wanted to. There's no special background required. We could start billing for patients. The government wouldn't know whether or not those patients exist. Right now, they're not really going to check. And they pay us first and chase back the money later. And that, to me, is always just kind of mind-blowing. I don't know any other type of business where no one's checking the work or the receipts. So I'll just put that out there for now.
One other question for the three of you, and that is, just each of you tell us the reaction that the articles have had.
Well, we got a lot of lip service from politicians. We had a legislative hearing that was held on Zoom, so that's a Zoom call, right? So some promises for legislation, state audit into corruption, and we had these communities saying, audit me, because they wanted, they were only going to pick 3 communities to audit, and we had people actually vying to be audited, which is a little weird. But then some interesting things happened. The labor unions, which were part of the political deal that was brokered behind the proposition for legalization, opposed a state investigation into the delays in handling worker wage theft claims. They actually sided with the state agency in opposing any kind of inquiry or investigation. So the question is, well, why are labor unions actually opposing an investigation into improving worker safety? So it begins to peel apart some of the political backroom deals that have been going on in our state, and I'm sure everywhere else. And I was told it was because there's other balls in the air. There's other deals being made, other reasons and stuff. So I've just kept on in the reporting on this. We'll have some more stories coming out. Like I said, the death toll is twice what it was when I reported last year, to keep some public awareness on this, because it's very easy to people say, that's horrible, we're going to make change. But then in the field, nothing has changed. These countertops are still available, and these manufacturers are still making them. And they're very popular, and they're cheap. And you got these guys working for $15 an hour for a death sentence, and they don't know it, right? So, and on hospice, the same thing's happening with drug rehab, right? And kids being picked up off the street and sent into drug, the for-profit motive. So it can be dispiriting. Look at the stuff you've been doing, Jim, right? And to show what's going wrong in the system, and then we keep saying it again and again, and it keeps happening and again in different forms. But all I can say is you just keep on.
Keep at it.
Keep on keeping on.
Keep it on.
Yeah.
These things take time. That's the
They do.
message. Yes, Jim. What?
So for us, the tangible things that happened, as I think I mentioned earlier, were the state of California launches a special enforcement program. They're writing an emergency rule to try to address this problem. And then the LA County Board of Supervisors starts to take steps toward a ban of all these products, which could ultimately spread to the whole state of California. I don't know. I'd go so far to say it could be a national ban, but one of the most gratifying things that we found, because we partnered with Univision, which obviously reaches a huge Spanish-speaking audience, and one of the reasons we wanted to team up with them is we wanted this story to get to the people who most needed to hear it, and that's workers, their families, potential workers. They're not going to read our story on our website. They're not going to listen to the English language radio story, probably. So I heard afterward, after the Univision piece came out, the same doctor who was our main source at UCLA said, wow, I've got people coming to me now saying, I never, men in that industry saying, I had no idea that dust was so dangerous. Can you please check me out? Or, I'm going to quit. I'm going to quit my job. And that was the power of having a Spanish language partner. So.
I'll start by saying that some of the findings of my story were, kind of prompted unintentionally by prior reforms. So the Los Angeles Times had actually done a great series on hospice a few years before, which led to a crackdown on fraudulent hospices in California. Some of those same owners, I then found in my reporting, had moved eastward. They'd moved to Nevada, they'd moved here to Arizona. I came to Phoenix for the story, and they'd moved to Texas. And so, one thing I think it's probably common that we all see as reporters is, the kind of game keeps shifting, or, regulators might close a door, but, a window opens elsewhere. What we saw from our story and kind of taking that more national look is that there were actually concerted efforts and swings on the federal level to make some changes. Some of them were, long overdue and, obviously being, pushed for, by a variety of parties, but we saw letters from members of Congress, pointed questions asked at congressional hearings, which were then followed by some pretty significant actions, which was a crackdown on some of the suspicious hospices we highlighted. A special enforcement program was started. Licenses were suspended. There was increased oversight for hospices that seemed to have kind of no patience whatsoever. So some of the most kind of, egregious fraud that, I could even see from, my perch was being acknowledged and kind of weeded out. And the other thing that was kind of overhauled was the inspection process, which was kind of woefully inadequate and has since changed on a federal level. So, as I said before, there's kind of many holes still in the system, and I think, all of the lobbying groups, even the trade groups, have kind of called for regulation, further regulation in certain ways, because, having these bad actors in the industry, hurts what is a really important and vital industry overall. And so, when you have even the trade groups kind of asking for things, I mean, there's all kinds of questions one can ask about that, but it also means that, wow, there is some really kind of beyond the pale behavior going on.
I love these answers. One of the reasons I asked this question, because one of the most common things that you find a lot of journalists say is that they've conducted an investigation and they've exposed something and nothing appears to happen. And you hear this over and over again. Sometimes the most complex issues, there is no immediate reaction. The more complicated things are, the more difficult it is. Part of your job is just to raise awareness of that issue. And that seeps into the body politic over time. It's not something that happens right away. So when I asked this question, I wasn't expecting them all to say, we had 10 people indicted, each one of us, and they're all in jail now. Reaction and change in America sometimes is very slow. But we in the press are at the very heart of that, because we can shine a light in areas that the public doesn't know about. And I think that's our principal obligation and responsibility and duty. Should we open it to questions here? How long do we have?
We have about 20 minutes left. We have a microphone set up on the side here, so if you could please line up there if you have a question, and you can direct it to any of our panel here, including Jim.
So we've answered everything?
I mean, one thing I wanted to add a little bit to what Jim just said, and that is, these things do take time. And it really reinforces for me the importance of business journalism, the importance of nurturing the next generation of business journalists, and that's you guys, right? Jim, of course, and these wonderful journalists have led the way. They've shown us the way, but we need to continue their work. It never, never ends. So turn over to questions. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Sarah. Hi, I interviewed her. I was asking Mr. Steele this earlier. As a journalism student, I'm super eager to just get it done. I don't have this patience, and you guys have this serious patience to you. So I just have a question if you have any tips on how I can improve my patience with writing these long pieces with so much care and consternation.
Oh, no. I started in the AP. I was a wire reporter. I'd had to have it done, and we were like, you had to be first, get it fast, get it first, get it right. But first was actually the first on the list. So I went from that and instant feeding the wire to doing longer and longer pieces. And it's not patience, it's masochism. It's beating your head against a wall and getting turned away, and it's painful, it's brutal. And not a lot of reporters want to endure that pain anyway. It's not a glamorous, right? It's like the worst kind of reporting. But my instincts were wire, go fast. Yeah, I'm like that too.
But it's also knowing when to stop reporting and when it's time to write.
I don't know that. When?
Yeah, the piece we did, again, it took about 4 months, which is not that long for an investigative piece, as these folks would attest to. And it just, when you've got a straightforward story, you've got great stuff, you've got great characters, you can see it, just do it. You don't have to agonize over it for the next 6 months. Some projects take 2 years. So it just really depends on the story. And I try to tell younger journalists, just don't overthink it. It's very easy to overthink it. So I need 10 more interviews. I need 10 more characters, just like the 3 I've already got. No, you don't. Just write the story. And then follow it aggressively would be the other bit of advice.
Just add one more thing is just kind of finding subjects that are meaty enough to kind of merit the time. I mean, there are some stories that should only take a week, and it makes sense that your instincts would kind of feel that and you would be impatient because there's only so much to say. But if you kind of find the right subject or the right way into a subject, for me, my curiosity is what kind of keeps me going in the most positive of times. Just having so many more questions I want answered, so many different angles, so many themes, finding that kind of subject that has various, areas or sources or, geographies that you have to explore. That in itself inherently takes time, but you're kind of propelled forward by the vastness of the terrain.
Thank you.
When I was the age of many of you out, can you hear? Mm-hmm. Okay. When I was the age of many of you out there, I used to save up everything and write it at the end. And one of the great revelations in my life came when I realized I should write as I go along. It doesn't mean that you've got the finished product, but you've got something out and you've seen what's there. And I can't tell you what you learn by the writing. You see what the whole, sometimes I thought I had a hole in the story, and I write it and I find out I don't. Conversely, I thought something was done and there's a huge hole in it. So I've been a real advocate for writing as you go along. It's going to have to be rewritten anyway. Just get it out, blaze that trail, clean it up later, and it'll be a better product.
So I know you spoke to the fact that even in the best pieces, you're not necessarily going to get an immediate fix. And I think even with that reality, all of you guys did kind of see some immediate change. I worry that with the shift in news consumption being more social media based and not necessarily vetted publications, that'll make reaching people to spread that awareness even more difficult for journalistic platforms. Do you have any thoughts about that? Can you instill any confidence that people can still be reached?
Yeah, people are still interested. It's just how and where is changing, right? So, and Univision, you saw him partnering, so to get to the audience that you need to get to. For us on cannabis, part of the audience is in Sacramento in the legislature, so they're aware of what we're pushing. But in other places, I found other formats. Podcasting is one that reaches a huge audience, but it's like every story has the way it wants to be told, and if you're aware of who you're trying to tell it to and how to reach them, it can be a very challenging environment right now, but an exciting one too, which is why I love coming here on campus and seeing the earnestness of everybody here, because I know you guys are figuring out the new ways to reach people, but the hunger for knowledge is always there. Yeah. He says yes.
We have time for a few more questions. Any other questions from the audience? You can, if you like, just, yep, stand right there. Yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Nicole, and I was just wondering, do you have any advice for any new journalists just joining the field?
Any advice for new journalists?
Any advice for journalists just joining the field now?
Have you joined yet, or are you about to? Are you still in school?
I'm still in school, yeah.
Okay.
Do you have good stories?
Well,
yeah.
The one thing that has not changed in journalism, I think we'll all agree on, are what we used to call clips, what your stories are. And that ultimately is something that editors who might be hiring you will look at. Mm-hmm. So the more clips you have and the more time you spend on whatever stories you come up with, the better off you'll be. You can have all the grand ideas in the world, but somebody will say, well, what have you done? Show me. And that hasn't changed. That's actually eternal in the business. So work on those stories, whatever they may be. And it's not necessarily important where they appear, but just have a good quality product that you can show somebody, that shows what you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't wait for permission to begin doing it, right?
I would add also, don't be afraid to start at a small newspaper. I started in 1978 in Longview, Texas, which none of you have ever heard of, I'm sure. And then I worked at some other small papers in the first 2 or 3 years of my career. I wouldn't have traded that experience for anything, because you really learn fast, right, Jim? I mean, and I've noticed not a lot, but certainly some young journalists, I want to go right to the Washington Post. I want to go right to CNN. Well, okay, maybe, but you'll learn a lot more if you're willing to take a job in some small, Arizona city or whatever. You'll learn more, I think, than you would at a big organization at that age.
Because you'll also be exposed to your audience. I think the most courageous journalism that's practiced is community journalism, because you're facing down the people. You're living with the people and interacting with the people you're writing about. And I think I've had, that's when I had more threats against me, when I was covering a school board, than, in some higher level. So it can be very rewarding and very challenging, and you'll get your chops.
I'm going to use the privilege of me still being on stage to chime in here on that one. And, one thing that I've seen change in my career as a journalist and a journalism educator is the decline in importance of publication brands. Now, the Los Angeles Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, they're still important brands, but we've seen with the rise of social media and different outlets for journalism and the different media we can use, the rise of the importance of your personal brand. And that's something that I think you can do. certainly. You know, you don't need to work for the LA Times or the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times to make a difference. You can do it at any publication. And oftentimes, the smaller publications, like Jim said, give you the opportunity to do just that. And why are we in this business? We're not in this business to tell our parents, oh, hey, I got a job with the Wall Street Journal. At least I hope not. We're in this business to make a difference. And there are so many opportunities in business journalism to get started. In fact, I would argue it's probably easier to jumpstart your career in business journalism than it is in almost any other field. Because there is money to be made by publications in business journalism of all shapes and sizes. Some of my former students have gone on to fantastic careers by getting started at a small publication like DebtWire, Merger Market, places you've never heard of. But it's a fantastic way to learn the business. You already know how to be a journalist. You already know how to be empathetic and curious and skeptical. You bring that to these publications, they will teach you the rest.
Hi there, my name is Sam. My question is for Ava. I was really struck by your use of Marcia as like the lead in your piece, and I wanted to ask how you cultivated that source and how you maybe advise talking to somebody who has done something bad and has remorse when you're doing an investigation like this.
Yeah, that's a great question. I had talked to a lot of different kind of hospice whistleblowers, and one of the advantages, I would say, in the story was kind of talking to people who had, you know, already kind of talked about their issues with lawyers. They were people who wanted to call out, you know, what they thought was wrong about their company or what they thought was wrong about what they had, been asked to do. And so, unlike some of the challenges I discussed, you know, that was something that, you know, made my work easier, right, is that there was a kind of pool of people who felt uneasy about that. And so finding who those people are, even if you can't, you know, they don't necessarily want to go on the record, starting to talk to them and even get a sense of the kind of universe of their concerns. What are the kinds of things you keep hearing from this pool of people? In terms of sources who might have regret, I mean, regret is usually the antidote to, the kind of spur, the, you know, medicine, the force for change, right? Someone who has done something and has second thoughts, second feelings, you know, feels morally injured. Those are often people who want to talk to journalists. So I would say, if anything, the real hard people to talk to are the ones who, you know, might be in denial. I mean, another really interesting group is people who, think they've done nothing wrong. I mean, you also want to get their perspective too. But I would say, I think, all of us have kind of things that kind of haunt us or we're uneasy about, and some of the most compelling stories is kind of tapping into that with your sources, because we all can kind of plug into that, I think, as people too, and follow that transformation, that journey, that awakening that someone might be on.
I didn't get the entire question, but I think your basic question was independent journalism. You mean things other than mainstream media and outlets that wouldn't have been around maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I mean, I guess it depends on what that outlet is. So many, and it depends on what their values are in terms of verification of information. A lot of the public is very confused by what they see online, and they think a lot of things are news that are really not news. And that's a difficult thing I think we all face in the business. So I think it gets down to how valid that particular outlet is. I mean, look at ProPublica, Ava's organization. I mean, founded, 13 years ago, 14 years ago, as an online investigative outlet. Not linked to any traditional media, correct, at the time. But since then, because of the quality of the work, the verification process, the legitimacy of what they do, they find partners all over the place, at the local level and the regional level. So it really gets down to what the agency is, what the organization is, and how well they've proven themselves. But I do think it is a problem with the public that they don't very often distinguish between one and another in terms of what they sometimes see online. And that complicates our mission in some ways in terms of knowing what's factual and what isn't. So, anyway, anybody else have any?
Yeah, no,
theories
he
on this?
used Substack as an example, and that goes to, quote, like establishing your own brand, but then you get your own following, and does that mean, though, that you're accurate, right? So it can be good because it gives you an alternative, outlet, but there are a lot of people who can abuse and misuse that, who can then just, publish nothing but propaganda or lies or stuff, and the public has a great difficulty in distinguishing, and it further muddies the water between what's credible and what's not. So it's a pretty dicey. I mean, in the small communities, like up in Northern California, there are a lot of people that publish a Facebook page, and it is the community news, and they are doing incredible journalism. But their followers, through time, they've built that credibility and that following, and so the formula is working there, because and there's a check and balance too, right? Because people can post and they can challenge and they can provide, controversial or converting evidence, otherwise, and try to keep things honest. That's the other thing that the brands have is that we are open to public criticism, letters to the editor. It's a two-way street, right? It's not just a voice out into the darkness.
Yeah, I don't see, if you want to use Substack as an example, I don't see that as a direct threat to what we do.
No.
Maybe I'm naive, but I don't. I think most people can distinguish, what you guys did from somebody's opinion piece on Substack. So I'm not saying it's not a potential problem, but it doesn't bother me a whole lot right now.
I mean, in some ways, one of the things you see in the media in general, though, is it's so fragmented in many ways by all of these things versus many years ago. Some people might say these are wonderful competitors to mainstream media, but the fact is it has divided the whole market up quite a bit. Regional newspapers that used to have a lot of power and a lot of sway in their areas, every one of those has been significantly, they've seen their power substantially eroded. They still may be the largest single media outlet in that neighborhood, but they don't have the impact that they once did. And that's just part of the new era. And a lot of it is good in terms of the things that have arisen, and some of it isn't so good.
Well, thank you guys very much. I want to thank our panelists here, Jim Steele, and our other award winners who are with us in the audience. We have made them work very hard today, visiting classes, discussing with students, and it's been a pleasure to have them here. Thank you all for your great questions. I hope you had a good time tonight. And remember, you have just attended the World Series of Business Journalism Awards. So thank you very much for joining us.